Since revealing the design of the Dive website, a lot of people have asked me about these course cards. So I wanted to make a quick tutorial to show you exactly how I built them in Figma, how I think about all of the little UI details that go into this, and then also just how easy it is to go from Figma to Framer to published website. Let's dive in. As a part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I use components to iterate really quickly in Figma. Because the way that I would actually start out building this is to just create some kind of an arbitrary shape to start. And I know that I'm going to have some kind of a card grid, and I want to be able to design this within the context of that grid. But instead of duplicating a bunch of frames and styling them all individually, I'm actually going to start off by creating a component as my very first step. I know that's a little bit weird and maybe even a bit scary, but watch how easy it becomes to iterate on my designs. So I have my main course card component. I'm going to leave that in the canvas for right now. And I'm going to quickly use Shift A and create a little grid like so. All right. So I have my card grid and I have a prototype set up over here. Now, because I have my component top left, I can pretty quickly make changes that are automatically going to reflect in all of the other cards. So as soon as I make that, I can then pop into prototype mode and see how it looks within the context of the larger scene. Kind of cool, right? So let's go ahead and start dropping in our data. I know that I'm going to have a course name, which I'm going to go ahead and start with Design System Bootcamp, which is by Molly Helmuth. And I know I'm also going to have some kind of a description. Now, in order to make these cards responsive, I'm going to hit Shift A to turn them into an auto layout. And then I'm going to set it to fill container. And I think I'm going to fix the height on this. So let's set that to about 560 right now, and we'll see how that goes. So then all I have to do is hit Shift Enter to come up to my grid. And I'm going to set a fixed width on this. So maybe I'll go 32 pixels from the sidebar, drag this to the edge, and then go minus 32. And that's just going to be the size of my main container. So if I hit enter, it's going to drill in and select the rows here. So I'll set those to fill container. And then if I hit enter again, it's going to select my course card, and I'll go ahead and set those to fill container. And just like that, this is a totally responsive grid where if I do want to shrink this, it's all going to work perfectly. So let's go ahead and style our text as the next step. I'm going to set this course title to H3, and you'll see that immediately kind of broke my design. So really quickly, I'll hit Shift Enter to select the parent, enter again, and now I have all of the text, and I'll set everything to fill container. I'm going to go ahead and set this to an H5, and then let's make this P3. You can see these are both 18 pixels. So I want to minimize the amount of font sizes I'm using, but I want to create some very clear hierarchy. I'm going to go ahead and add a color to this instructor name. And then let's just generate some text really quickly to use for the description. I'll do lorem ipsum. Perfect. So what do we notice here? Well, we have some decent hierarchy established, and our text is equidistant. And as a general principle, I like to establish clear grouping in my text. So instead of having these all be the same distance apart, what if we created an auto layout here and really tightened that text up? And maybe we hit Shift Enter and create more space up here. So you can see that did a lot for the design. It's a little bit more visually interesting, and there's more clear associations with the pieces of text. And the next thing I'm going to do is quickly decrease the contrast of this subtext because I really want this title to pop, and I want to lean all the way into the hierarchy of this card. So all I have to do is just hit 8 on the keyboard. I'm going to drop the opacity, and now you can see there's some really great hierarchy going on here within my fonts. Now I have some other pieces of text that I want to deal with too, which is the date metadata. So let's say this is February 23rd through April 1st. I definitely don't want that to be blue, so I'm gonna set it to be white. And then I know I also have a price. Obviously, this looks a little bit silly, so I'm gonna go ahead and group these so that they're much tighter. And again, I don't want two pieces of text with the exact same contrast level stacked on top of each other. So I think I'm gonna make the date the priority and decrease the contrast of the price by doing the same thing. I'm just gonna hit 8 on my keyboard to drop the opacity down to 80%. Now this is looking pretty good, but I know that I need a CTA as well. So I'm just gonna duplicate this piece of text here, move it outside. And the nice thing about this design already is I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 font elements, and 5 of them use the same font size. So I'm keeping a really simple type system, which is definitely a goal. So I'm gonna go ahead and type my CTA, which is view more. And I know that I want some kind of an icon. So I'm gonna open up my favorite icon plugin, which is Phosphor, and grab a quick arrow. Now, if I zoom in on this guy, the thing about Phosphor is it adds everything as a group, and I don't want that because it's not great for resizing. So I'm gonna Command Option G, create a frame, call that icon. Then I can ungroup this, remove the background, and now that I have these two vectors, in order to make it for really easy overrides and help with the export to Framer, I wanna make sure that this is a solid fill. So I'm gonna go Command Shift O to convert it to a solid. I'll make it a union. So now I have a single layer, and I'm gonna rename this vector, which is what I do for all of my icons. And if you get in the practice of that, then you guarantee that all of your overrides will just work out of the box. So let's make this white and zoom out. All right, I'm gonna shrink this icon down to 16 pixels. And let's throw it in an auto layout here. We're gonna call it button, make it horizontally aligned, tighten that spacing, and voila, that is looking like a button. Now, the thing about these cards is that some courses might have a longer description than others, and I wanna make sure that this CTA button is always in the same predictable place. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna set the space between on this card to auto. And that's gonna make this button always live at the bottom, which I do like, but again, I don't like my spacing here. So I'm gonna create another level of auto layouts. So I'm gonna quickly select these pieces of text. Maybe I'll tighten that to 32 again, call this top, select these two items, call it bottom, and then match that 32 pixel spacing for consistency. And now I have a much better layout that's gonna be more flexible based off of the amount of text that each of these cards is gonna take up. All right, let's start bringing this to life. So I'm gonna go ahead and insert a quick picture of Molly. And one of the things about the photo of this instructor is in order to have it crop well, I want it to be pinned to the bottom right of this card. So I'm actually gonna come up here, hit this icon to absolutely position it. And then I'm gonna pin it to the bottom right, like so, voila. And the next step is I'm gonna use the remove background plugin, which honestly just feels like magic, the way that I can get this to work so quickly. That's a decent start. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a little bit of color. The shapes that I have here are fine, but they're not really standing out on the backdrop at all. So I have Molly with a gradient here. I'm going to do the same thing and absolutely position this. Maybe let's make it 160 to start. And if you hit Command bracket left, you can just really quickly move it to the bottom of the course card, and I'm gonna rename that blur because what I wanna do is have really soft color coming from this corner here. So I'll just add an effect. I want that to be a layer blur, and I'm gonna crank that up to 100, maybe a little bit more. Let's do 200 pixels. And then I can quickly hit Shift Enter and clip the content on my card to hide it. This is starting to have a little bit more separation from the backdrop. Now at this point in the process, this is where I love to start playing with interactive components because I want to feel the design, not just look at it. So I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate it and then move this course card out of the grid. In this way, I can start adding a hover state. So one effect that I know that I want to do is play with this blur right here and actually increase the size on hover like so. And this is why I like exploring with hover states, because this is a big part of the experience. And this way I can see it as I'm actually creating the card itself. Now, the other visual element that is missing is we've been playing a lot with this stencil text for instructor names. And again, I'm going to absolutely position this. Obviously that's way too high contrast. So I'm going to hit 1.5 to make it 15% opacity. And just like that, I have my stencil. So now I have to get this into the hover state. So I'm going to quickly paste this over here. And a fun thing that I want to explore is what it would look like for this stencil text to actually rotate on hover. And by doing that, I can quickly see how that feels, and it's totally fun. But the more that I look at this card, this blur looks great, but I want it to have a little bit of texture. And if there's one thing I've learned from Fonz Mans is that every gradient needs a little bit of noise. So I'm actually going to add a noise layer to this entire card. I'm going to absolutely position it like so. And the important thing here is we want to make sure that it is pinned to the corners. And I actually have a noise layer that I've already added to my styles like this. And let's just move it to the back, but we want it over the top of the blur. So let's call this noise. And then I'm going to play with the opacity to get it to the point where it's kind of subtle. I think I'm going to end up with about 25% like this. And now when we hover over this card, you can see there's a little bit of texture, and that is feeling much better. All right, now let's land the plane on the rest of these visuals. So you'll notice that I went ahead and added all of the other instructor overrides since I didn't think you would want to watch me changing a bunch of text and cropping images. But one thing you'll notice is we set the image fill to luminosity, and that's what's allowing this color to come through and create this really cohesive feel. There's only a few more things left that I want to get into this design, and they really are just creating more differentiation between the default and the hover state. We have this text rotation and the blur, and that's really nice, but I want to get a little bit more contrast in here. I'm going to go ahead and start with adding a little shadow, and the easiest way to do that is with the smooth shadow plugin. And typically what I do is I just crank this alpha all the way up until it's really noticeable, and then I'll slowly work backwards and play with some of these variables until it feels right. So let's just see how that feels here. And yeah, that's really nice. You get a nice little lift on that card, and it really comes to life on hover now. The other thing I want to do is increase the contrast of my border. I have this set to 10% right now, and I'm just going to double it to 20%. I think I'm going to take this border one step further and add a little bit of a glow because a lot of the site is playing with light. So I'm going to go ahead and set a white inner shadow, and let's just see what this looks like. Yeah, it's kind of fun. I'll probably make it a little bit more subtle. Maybe we'll drop this down to 2 and 15%. I'm kind of just eyeballing it right now, but that's really softening it up versus just having that high contrast border. This feels a little bit softer and I like it. The last thing I want to do is create some kind of a button transition here. So I'm going to see what it would look like to hide this text and have the button pop out on hover. And that's pretty nice. This is one of those effects that's going to be a little bit easier to fine tune in Framer as well, but conceptually, I like how this is feeling. And something that really honestly helps is I've become a fan of defaulting to gentle. Instead of ease in, which is the default when you do Smart Animate, gentle has just a little bit of bounce. You can kind of see it with how this stencil text rotates here, where it just comes back a little bit. It's super, super soft, and has kind of quickly become my default for dive related things, at least because we have a little bit of bounce in the design language. This is pretty much it for Figma. I like to throw the ball as far as I possibly can, and at this point in the process, I'll probably put everything into Framer and start tweaking it there. So let's look and just see how easy that is. The first thing is I'm gonna make sure that my card is set to a fixed width and a fixed height, at least for now. And the second thing is I'm going to detach my component and remove auto layout like so. Sometimes the absolute positioning gets a little bit wonky transitioning from Figma to Framer, but at this point, all I have to do is run the Figma to HTML with Framer plugin. It's gonna copy the layers, and then I can switch over to Framer, paste them directly onto my canvas, and it actually looks great. The only thing I need to do is update my text because I'm using a custom font, and then I'll write some custom CSS to make this an outline, since that is not possible out of the box. But other than that, this starting point is amazing. It would have taken me a half hour to get to this point in Webflow, and now all I have to do is hit Command-Option-K, just like in Figma. I can create my course card component, and then with a click of a button, I can add my hover state and bring in those designs from Figma. And from this point on, I'll probably do all of my iterating in Framer directly. And that's kind of how I think about my web design work now. Figma is all about getting those initial concepts fleshed out, exploring really quickly with components, and kind of throwing a bunch of things at the wall. And once I get to the point where I'm mostly honed in, I'll just copy everything, put it into Framer, and then work on the finer details, the transitions, the animations, the hover states, all in Framer directly. I'm pretty early in my journey with Framer, but so far I have to say I am super impressed. I'm gonna stop the tutorial there because I'm definitely not the person to learn from when it comes to Framer. But if you head to dive.club, we're working on all kinds of awesome Framer courses, and I think you're gonna like what you find. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.